Welcome to the People Performance Podcast, where we discuss all things people performance. The People Performance Podcast is made up of 3 series. First up, we have the Leader Lounge episodes with founder of T2, Martin Johnson. Then we have the guest interview episodes. And finally, we have our performance episodes delivered by our very own T2 consultants. If you've listened to our podcast and you want to get in touch and find out a little bit more about what we do or how we can help and support you, reach out via help@trans2performance.com. You can stream and listen to our podcast on all available platforms. So for now, sit back, tune in and enjoy the People Performance Podcast.
Coming up on this episode,
it's something that's very, very simple to get your head around. And I actually also think, I know this sounds weird, but you can even use this when you're going to go pitch an idea.
I think that's an unappreciated or an overlooked level of incentive, crazily enough.
So actually, it's not about no resources, it's about overwhelm. And that leads to frustration as well, doesn't it?
Welcome to the People Performance Podcast with myself, Scott Morrison.
And me, Tracy Roberts.
Hi, Tracy.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be taking a look at how we explore real change and how it happens and how we make it last. So to do that, we're going to take a look at the Lippitt-Knoster Model for managing complex change and a framework that outlines 6 essential key elements to making sure this works. Tracy, you are somebody who uses this and is a strong supporter of this framework. So ideally, you're the best person. So give us a run through how we use it, what we do with it, and how the listeners can maximise their situations at this moment in time.
I think for me, change is, it's a bit of a dirty word, let's be honest. It's, if you say it often enough, people start to inwardly kind of, disappear. And I think that's why sometimes actually when we use this model, we sort of don't frame it as something for change. We actually frame it as something for good communication and project management and all those things. But I think you're right. I think one of the key focuses of using this particular model is simplicity. It's down to 6 key elements that we can explore and expand on. It's durable, so you can use it and revisit it as many times as you need to in any given situation. Like I said, it's not just complex change. It can sometimes be as simple as project management, communication, that's the stuff that we would sometimes classify in the old term as soft change in an organisation as well. And I guess the other part of it is it's, I don't know, maybe the simplicity element in terms of explanation to people. So like the model itself is simple, but what I mean is you can have a simple model and follow it ABC, but the simplicity in its communication and I guess how you can apply it is kind of the third element I like about it. I think if you apply it to most situations, people can connect with it really quick. And I can think of dozens and dozens of workshops and even coaching sessions where there's been a massive penny drop moment, even 2 minutes into me starting the conversation about it. And I think that's what I like about it. It means we don't have to spend hours and hours digging into detail. We can have a quick overview, get our head in that, and then we can go as deep as we want with it.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think that the human element it brings to the top, if that makes sense, how people can start to connect the 6 elements to how that means to their people. That's a huge thing.
Yeah, definitely.
And get on board with that. So within the 6 elements, how are we gonna describe it to the guys? How are we gonna break it down? How would you like to start?
Well, I think the key thing to mention before we kind of start breaking it down is we do sometimes refer to it as the 6 key elements of change rather than the Lippitt-Knoster model because it is simplistic. The idea behind the model in itself is that if any of these 6 elements are low, non-existent, or sometimes actually in abundance and compared to the others, the offset of that or the imbalance of that means it's highly unlikely your change or your project or your communication will be strong. So I guess the first thing to outline is when you understand the model, the easiest way to do it is almost to reverse engineer it. If you're seeing certain behaviours coming through and you understand the model, you can assign the behaviours element to what might be missing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I like about it. It's not necessarily about, the huge getting into the deep psychology of change because we've got other things that we use to help us with that. This is more around if I'm seeing this going on, rather than putting my blinkers on and forging forward because the project is the project, it's about, okay, what's really going on here? What might I have missed or what might the organisation have not quite landed correctly to get this output at the other end? So I think you can use it as a preparative thing where you go, right, let's go through these 6 elements and make sure that we're on point before we communicate. And I think that's the key thing to mention. A lot of changes in the moment, isn't it? You go, right, we're going to do this. And it's, operationally, you don't have much time to think. But there's still enough time to apply these 6 elements in the moment and go, okay, well, what do we know and what do we not know? And how do we get it right? But if you are going to approach some of these bigger change projects, then I would argue that this is the sort of stuff that you can cover way back before we even start to communicate with people. Because if you're pretty confident that you've got enough knowledge in all these 6 elements and you've thought through the communication piece, you've thought through what might go wrong, with that particular part of the 6 elements, then the chances are when you come to actually communicate and get people on board with things, you're going to have a much better chance of success. And so it can be used in the moment, but it can also be used to, and the key thing here is it's not just about using it, then it's about revisiting it regularly. And so for me, 6 key elements. I think we should probably write them down today and have a little look at them. But you can reverse engineer it. You can go, what behavior am I seeing? That's missing. And that's what I like about it.
Right. And as I said at the top of this, the human element's huge. And if this isn't in play, it's the human behaviours,
yes,
and then how they show up in the right place potentially with each other. Like you say, you've used communication a lot. That's going to give us our hints and tips as to where we might be falling down in areas.
Yeah. And some of these words, in terms of like what we see and what we experience, they're quite hard words to hear. So I'm going to use one, sabotage. We're going to get there in a minute. Let's get into that. Some people will look at that word and go, wow. But sabotage on a great scale, if we think of massive, movies that we've watched that have sort of encompassed all those things, there's a big element to that. There's also the little small parts of sabotage that go on in a business when people are not quite on board.
Self-sabotage also.
Self-sabotage as well, absolutely. And some of that is around denial, etc. So I think we get into it because for me, it's something that's very, very simple to get your head around. And I actually also think, I know this sounds weird, but you can even use this when you're going to go pitch an idea. So, even if it's not changed anything, like if you're going to go in and have a conversation with a stakeholder or think about what might be involved and what might be required, I even think going through the 6 elements in your head allows you a better space to think about the questions they might ask you before they invest in you to make sure this project runs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So, useful stuff.
So shall I list, or are we going to go through the human elements and give them a breakdown of that? Which way would you like to do it?
I think what we do is we go through the elements bit by bit and we discuss why they're important. And then when we get to the end, we can discuss the bits that are missing.
Sure.
Yeah?
Okay, no problem. So I think it's clear then with the 6 elements, and I'll list the 6 elements in a moment. What we're saying here is, just to wrap that in a little knot, is if these 6 elements are in play, it gives us a greater chance of success in delivery.
Yes.
Should just one be missing, there is an absolute chance that process, that change could wobble or even fail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good stuff. So let's start with the first one then. So the first one is vision. So in relation to vision, why is vision so important? What kicks us off with the word vision? Why is that first?
I think it sometimes is down to the way you see that word, isn't it? Because quite often people think about visionary. They'll think, person at the front of the ship steering and the big picture. And yes, the vision is the big picture. It's what does the flag on the hill look like? But if the vision is missing from the project change program communication, most of the time it means that employees are kind of unaware of what the organization is actually trying to achieve. And that sometimes leads to confusion and disorientation.
Right.
So, but I guess what we're trying to get into here is, well, what does it look like to get that right? It means that, I guess, in the organization, in some shape or form with your vision, you've really set the tone for what the journey is going to look like. You have made sure that you've, even within that vision, started to connect with something that's at the back end of these 6 elements, which we'll talk about in a minute, and set benchmarks and waypoints. And it's not just about the flag on the hill. It's about, okay, here's how the journey is going to start and here's the expectations. But this is why it's important, and the why is massive with a vision. And I guess the other thing about the vision is it's not about someone being great at explaining things. As part of it is that, I'm the person at the front that tells everyone what we're going to do. I'm going to come in and refocus everyone every week. No, part of having a good vision is people connecting with it instantly and knowing the part that they play. Does that make sense? So if you never connect with the vision, you're always going to rely on that figurehead who delivered the vision to deliver the vision. No, you've got to know what part you're responsible for or why you're doing it. And what we know about people in organizations is purpose is important. So if they know what part they play, and they connect with it instantly, even if they don't always agree with it, and we'll get to that in a minute, they're on board. They get it. They know the direction we're going in and they understand the why. If you get that wrong and they're disconnected, then the vision stays within the senior leadership team.
Yeah.
And therefore, we think we're forging forward, but we're not.
Get that. So the disconnect is obviously the breaking point. So it's definitely important then to have a shared vision. Obviously, that will reduce the resistance and that potentially could motivate the project and the people on board as to regain momentum and move forward.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, that makes sense to me.
And I think a lot of leaders, just as a last note on that, think they are really good at the visionary piece. So if I get them to self-score, they'll go, oh, we're a 5. And I'll go, okay, why? Because the statement's very clear. And I'm like, okay, let's wind that back.
We've had examples of it.
Yeah. The statement that went out on an email is incredibly clear, but have you brought it to life for people? And that links in with the second one that we're going to look at in a minute. You can't just put it in one language and expect everyone to take this vision in or understand it. There's a team somewhere in a back office that feels completely disconnected from that vision because they cannot see what part they play.
Yeah.
There's also a team that actually vehemently disagrees with the vision because they don't connect. You've not changed the language or gone in and had that discussion with them to understand that. So therefore, we might get some of the other stuff coming up. And it does lead nicely into number 2, actually, doesn't it, if you think about it?
Absolutely. And for me, I know for myself, if I just speak from a personal, confusion starts to really dig in if that vision's not there. I mean, we know how I work. You give me the vision, you point me in a direction, and I set off on that journey. But at some point, I'm going to need to ask questions because that goes lots of questions, right? But that's because confusion. I get the immediate and why we're doing it, but then all of a sudden I'm going to be like, oh, hang on, I'm a tad lost now. So confusion starts to step in. So if it's not done correctly, then that could be wholesale, couldn't it?
And it's not just confusion or disorientation, which is maybe the word we might associate. It's actually because, I guess, if you think about it, it means we're not just lost. We're all pulling in different directions.
Yeah.
So it's actually quite an active word, isn't it? We're all pulling in different directions. It's because the way we've read the vision is the way we've read the vision, not the way the vision actually has connected us all.
Yeah.
So you can have everyone trying to achieve that vision, but in their own way, in silos.
Which is essentially what I go and do.
Yeah. So you've got to be able to put it into other people's language, but reconnect. I always think of it like the 3 cogs. If you get the vision right, people will get to the kind of buy-in bit, but will understand it. They might not always buy in, but they'll understand it. And then the organisational cog is turning, and then the team cog is turning around and helping that power because they kind of see their part, but the individual always feels that their cog is turning as well. And even if it's something that's difficult for them or it's not the best decision for them, etc., they kind of are being brought along on the journey, and even though it's difficult. And sometimes that's what business is, isn't it? So
okay, absolutely brilliant. So the second piece then, or the second part of the elements is consensus.
Oh, crikey, this one goes wrong all the time, doesn't it? And people see the word and go, well, not everyone's going to agree. No, you're right, they're not. But consensus is not necessarily about agreeing with something. It's about feeling part of a process. So if people don't buy into what you're doing, you might end up in a situation where we've got lots of different things that can happen there. But actually, worst case scenario, which is what we're talking about here, is people actually rebel and pull the other direction. So their cogs turning the other way, right? And this actually then stops the project or the change happening because they're actively pulling against this, the grain, if you like. And the thing about that is that in every situation when it comes to change or communication, you can always slow that down. So even if people are pulling in the other direction, there's ways to make that land softer, if that makes sense. And for me, this is this bit about the preparation, okay? So you might have decided in the boardroom, as an example, which we often have to, what we think this vision is going to look like. And we can make that decision as leaders because we have the data, we have the facts, we've the gut instinct. We have the leaders in another country tell us what we're going to have to do if we're going to be really blunt about it. But when we are then going to have a look into the inner workings of our business, we've got to go, how do we best get people to understand the vision? So part of that vision is What language do people need to hear this in, and how do we involve them? So what I put on my notes is encouraging collective collaboration. And what I mean by that is it's not about getting people in a room saying, here's the decision we've made and you're part of this, because in some cases that is the case.
Yeah.
In most cases, it's getting ahead of it and saying, here are the potential things that might be coming. What are your thoughts? What are the early warnings that you want to give us about what the potential risks might be? What are the opportunities you can see from this? What are your concerns? And it's all about listening for me. It's not necessarily about getting instant buy-in. It's about listening. It's about getting those. And I think early warning is the right thing here. You could be making a catastrophic decision in your business because you've not considered X, Y, Z. And the reality is you're not on the middle floor anymore. You don't see the realities always of the customer.
Or it's on the ground type thing.
Absolutely. So I'm not saying in every situation you go, oh, we should always go and ask everyone's opinion. No, I understand in business, I have to do it here sometimes. Yeah. We have to make a decision based on the facts we have. But what we can do is get people involved in the communication. So sometimes it looks like before we make a decision, we're at 80%, we've got 3 things we want to consider. Let's get people in a room and help them help us. That could be one option, couldn't it?
Yeah. And I think when we speak to people and the clients that we have in our cohorts doing the sessions we do, I think one of the biggest things to engage commitment is that early involvement, to help them feel aligned, to help them get on board. And they don't always have to agree. They don't, but they just need to understand what the motion is and why they're moving. And that helps the larger group move forward and bring people along, like you said.
I think it's feeling seen and heard.
Yeah.
I like to summarize consensus as I feel seen and heard. And even if you've raised your concerns and you say, I feel this won't work because, if we're communicating in the right way, we're not null and voiding what they're saying. We're saying, tell me a little bit about that. What is it? And even just by us going, tell me a little bit about that, how does that affect you? The inner workings of that human goes, actually, I am being quite...
We can work both ways,
Yeah.
can't it? And it's that I think, well, am I thinking self? And sometimes when we talk about change, a lot of individuals, I know I've definitely gone through it when we're thinking about change. What have I lost? What do I stand to lose by doing
what's in it for me, which
So
is something we'll come later.
it could be the what's in it for me, but what I lose right now, but that's in there. But like you say, it's just, we don't always have to agree to move on as a group. We just need to have an understanding or a better understanding of what it is. And that view you just said there is, even if you ask the question of the individual, them being heard, having their math to the equation, being valued in how we move forward is enough for them to get on board. Just to know that there was part of the process rather than sitting on the outside sometimes.
Yeah, and I think what I like about that is that going into that a little deeper, if you can still get this right, because I know organisations that have done this, and I've been in organisations that have gone, we'll make it look like consensus, but it isn't.
Right.
We've already made a decision, right? If you're going to do this well, you have to do it with meaning. So even if you've decided 80% of what's happening is happening, the 20%, that's what you communicate. And you're clear about that. You go, here's what we can't do and here's what we can. Here's what we can change and here's what we can.
Non-negotiables.
Non-negotiables. Or if there's non-negotiables and it is directive change because of something that's really important, we need to find any variable within that we can give someone input to.
Yeah.
It might be the timeline. It might be the way we do it, the process, anything. And just letting them explain to you how that will affect their daily life as an example, or the process. Usually these conversations actually unravel something quite interesting, because a lot of research shows us with particularly change programs, we'll go, it'll affect that team and that team. Everyone else, I'm good. They're not. Usually there's a domino effect. Yeah, there's a domino effect somewhere. And until we actually ask this question, we don't realise. So someone in the back goes, ooh, actually, I do X, Y, Z within that project. And all of a sudden, I've got no resource. And how am I going to... And someone goes, oh, we haven't thought about that. So I think leaders should also see this consensus part as, oh, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
And if we can be honest and say, here's the 20% we can negotiate or we can change, people will listen. And to your point, even if we can't change anything, if you hear me out, and you're genuinely listening, it might be that you can soften in my landing here. And if we get that on board, we're less likely to get people pulling the opposite direction. We'll still get a few, of course we will.
Yeah.
But on the whole, if people understand, then they'll move along.
Okay, good stuff. And the third element is skills. Now, this is, I think, where the people performance people, everything we do revolves around the human element. And I think the output of the missing piece to this is a big thing for every human at all levels, I think, regardless of which tier you sit at. So this is really important to me, and I think this will probably land a few good points for the guys. So walk me through skills.
Well, skills is an interesting one because you would think it was obvious, wouldn't you? You'd think, right, if I'm going to do X, Y, Z in my organisation, or this project's going to run in this particular way, I need to make sure I have people without, going all Liam Neeson with a particular set of skills. However, is that 2 movie quotes I've got in today? I have, haven't I? Because it's good as well. So that I'm hoping people are picking up on this. I'm going to see if I can get another one in there before we finish this podcast today. But in reality, what we're saying here is that if people feel like they don't have skills to either deal with the change, be part of the change, the process is changing for them and they need to do their job differently, they will feel in a threat state for whatever reason, and they will feel anxious about failing. Now, if you've got anxiety, the thing about anxiety is it shows up in different ways, doesn't it? So we always do this work about emotional, sort of granularization, how like anxiety comes out as anger.
Yeah.
It can come out as nervousness. It can come out as, just a fundamental change in the way you do things and in terms of you communicating. You can go in on yourself. You can get louder. And sometimes we see this anxiety show up as anger, but actually it's anxiety. It really is anxiety because we actually don't understand how we're going to get through this process. And that could be anything. It could be, I'm changing a process. So I don't know, I was working with an organisation a little while ago around a CRM system being put in. And all the senior execs were saying this is going to be so good because we're going to have a system. It's all the same across the globe. It's really user-friendly. It means we can see everything. They're going to be able to see the people in other countries. It's going to be great. There was nothing in there around any of the skills element. But what they didn't consider in that was not just learning the CRM. It's the anxiety of all the stuff that surrounds that. So, for instance, all of a sudden, you're going to be able to see the way I do things here. My processes, the things I'm not very good at as a consequence. So if I'm gathering data on a client for a CRM system, I never put notes in. I'm never, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. It's just, that's the way we do things around here. So it wasn't even just the system. It was the fact of the exposure. Does that make sense? Sure. And because the leaders were like, oh my God, this is exactly what I need. I want to see everything. These guys not just were scared of the CRM, were also scared of admitting that the other stuff that follows the CRM is not happening in there. And other countries were like, no, actually, this is exactly how we do it. And this is brilliant, So we had a whole heap of anxiety going on because the people who didn't want to embrace the system because of the lack of skills were nervous and it was coming out as pulling back almost. And then the people who were actually very skillful in terms of they knew how to operate the system and put things in, their behaviours changed because they were like, why are we the only people doing this? Does that make sense? So it felt like a push and a pull, and it all came from skills, either high skills or low skills. The only way you can get around this in any situation is to think about skills analysis. Now, that could be a proper skills analysis exercise across your teams. It could be like finding gaps by going into certain areas and doing a little bit of work there. It could be feedback. But don't forget that if you ask someone most of the time, did you get that? They go, yeah. And why do they say that? Because they don't want to look bad.
Yeah, no one really wants to ask for help, I guess, in some scenarios there, because you're seen as weak. And if you're in change, your dip in psychological safety can come into play. So you don't want to look as though you're not capable of doing a role because you're in
or on board,
or on board, you don't want to seem hesitant because how that might be viewed might be like, well, they're not fully on board. Are they committed? Are they ready to get into this the way we want them to get into it? And that can really challenge it. So you try and keep everything on an even keel. If we go back to, I did it earlier on, people obviously can't see what we're talking about, but I did the smile and wave motion of
third movie in
Madagascar people. But this is it. So smile and wave, boys, and we move on. And it's that tool, isn't it, sometimes? And as a result, we do that. And because you've missed your moment potentially to ask for help, because that's when it was being offered, to find yourself a week, 2 weeks, a month down the line in that scenario of how do I do it? And now who do I ask? And who do I ask without getting, some sort of negative pushback on it because I've missed my
call out. Yeah. And I think that's such a powerful thing. And we're accrediting most of this conversation now to skills in terms of doing things. But I'm going to throw this out there. Sometimes the skills are the people bit. So in a change program, if you've not done something on a huge scale before, you've not had to deal with the psychological fallout or the change sickness or whatever it might be, and you are a manager, your anxiety comes from a lack of skills in that side of things.
Yeah.
So it's not just the hard, I need you to run a CRM or change a process. Sometimes the skills come from, I don't have the skills to deal with this. And it's sometimes the people element, the EQ element of things. And one of the things I wrote on here was, you've got to think about training and mentoring and coaching. That sort of forms part of skill building, doesn't it? And also the reality of outsourcing in some situations. So I guess one example of that would be us jumping in to help with certain cohorts around their processes or the psychology and getting them to understand why they feel so triggered with certain things. But it might also be, okay, let's just pick a CRM as a great example. We're going to use the people who are providing that to give us additional support in terms of training, because they've got the patience and the capacity to work with people at all levels. So if we've got someone really struggling with the basics of this system and someone who's upwriting reports and running all these magical things that can help the business, I want to be able to work within those boundaries. And if we can do that, we bring the anxiety levels down and people are more likely to be open to the other stuff that's going on.
Absolutely. And then the flip side to that would be, if you're not that person who's, like you say, doing all of these things, you're learning as you go in. And I'm doing that at the moment with the process, and it feels like you're building the airplane whilst in flight.
Always. And that's what most change programs feel like.
I think it is. So pulling everything in as it's going, I need that bit and got to go back.
And a plane wing hanging off and everything.
Absolutely.
So I think one of the things I always like to land on with that one is it's not just the hard stuff, it's the soft stuff too.
Yeah.
I don't like to use those terms, but they help us understand. But also make sure that you're having those conversations, because that's a human element.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's really good, this, actually. Whilst you know stuff, hearing it from a different point of view really sort of engages how you might have missed something or seen something differently to somebody else, which is really good. And next section then is looking into incentives. And I think my background of experience, incentives is such a large part of how we move things forward, achieve goals, and get people where we need them to get as a group, as a head, as a tribe, if you like. I think I'm interested to hear your views of where incentive sits in this process, of the 6 elements, and how you view it.
I guess the simplest way to put it is, what does this mean to me, or what's in it for me? But it operates in people's kind of systems in different ways, doesn't it? So for some people, they are very much what's in it for me, as in, I want to understand how it'll change my daily practices, my financial incentives, or the way we do things around here, whatever that might look like. And there are other people who are in it for we all the time. So even though they'll take a fleeting second to go, oh, I don't like the sound of this, their initial thoughts, and this is true, there's a lot of, differently built people, they will immediately think we. So even if they think they can deal with it, they don't actually understand how to make sure other people can be comfortable with it. Does that make sense? You could get a leader who feels incentivized for the business, but then immediately goes, oh, now I've got to make sure my team understand the benefits, and I'm not sure they're going to connect with it like me. So I think one of the things I always say is that change might go ahead if people don't understand the benefits in me or we, but it sometimes gets resistance, because at certain points, one example I can use is long-term change projects, when it's very, very tiring. It's a hard slog. Things have changed. We're uncomfortable for a long period of time.
Yeah.
At a certain point, if the incentive is not live and kicking in that person's head, they can't reconnect with it, then they start to slow down. They pull against the grain. They'll start to kind of be in a position where they'll question more things. If someone can instantly connect with an incentive in their head in some shape or form constantly, and we've done the right job to make sure that lands and we're reconnecting all the time, then I guess it's like for the greater good, isn't it? So people will always go, this is hard, but when, and they'll start to think like that. So I think one of the big things that I always note about this is about, can you explain in the right way to what the benefits to the business are and to the individuals, even though sometimes that doesn't feel like it's a big thing. So for instance, if you're trying to tell someone that the benefits of the business is we're going to make an extra £10 million this year and we're going to avoid losing 50 jobs by making this change, that might sound like a big benefit to the business, but then the nitty gritty of that is, but we're still going to lose 40 people and you're going to have to do more work.
Yeah.
So we have to find a way to make that message land in a way where people can connect with it. Human, it's still human because they understand that there are still things going on that don't feel great. But what they can connect with is longer term vision, how it might look and feel, when we've come out the other side. And sometimes things like recognition in the moment as well. So I've wrote team and individual, what this team can do to make a difference at this time, and what you can do personally as a subject matter expertise with your subject matter expertise and all those things. If that's connected with people, I think they can make their peace with things. And when things are tough, look to their locker. Now, for some people, that's really hard because for other people, it's like, right, I'm going to make more commission if we do it this way. For other people, it's like, yeah, but my job actually is going to get easier. I think I'm more at risk. I know it sounds weird.
It makes sense, I think, and I've worked with as I say, in a number of these industries, and like you're saying now, as leaders viewing certain things and as individuals viewing certain things, I've worked with a leader where they've said, incentives. Why incentives? When the change is so beneficial for everybody, why do we need?
Not everyone should eat it that.
Right, exactly. Why do we need these shorter incentives as they go? But then that's the immediate view of looking into a financial incentive, if that makes sense. We've spoke about this a number of times. The incentive doesn't always need to be financial. It could be time. It could be something so grand, something so small, but that person's going to see it as something so huge. We talk about how we like to receive certain things. We use words of affirmation, human touch, gifts, all of these little things, but it doesn't have to be massive.
Not at all.
But it can be enough. So I think when people talk about incentives, maybe the people listening to us now will be thinking, right, well, we don't have a budget for that. Well, we work across public, private, sports, and not everyone has a budget. So how do we make it work for them? And what is it they need as an individual? Maybe a workforce is a different levels of workforce need different things, right?
Yeah. And you won't know that unless you ask the question.
Right.
So this is what I always say, like, let's just take it back to basics, languages of appreciation, right? So if you're someone who's gifts and you like tangible gifts, and I'm someone who likes words of affirmation or, I don't know, acts of service. When things like this are going on, sometimes plugging some of that stuff in is massively helpful. And that's good to know. But one of the biggest things is appreciation in any form. So it helps more than like people, when they're doing it tough and giving them really tangible praise or even feedback to help them. It might be tough, but it'll help them through that,
I think feedback's massive.
That's huge.
That is I think that's an unappreciated or an overlooked level of incentive, crazily enough. I was doing a session yesterday with a room full of nurses, and just some of the conversation we was having, it's just like, do we say thank you enough? Do you know what I mean? Like,
we often say thank you in our language. And so what I mean by that is somebody else's thank yous, I've made you a coffee. So in the next person goes, but you've not actually said the words. You've not actually said to me, this is what you did right. For other people, it's like you've not given me your time in weeks. That's a thank you to me.
And when we talk about that feedback, it's that piece of, I can walk out, and we've had this discussion, walk out, good job today, guys, head out. Give me a moment, give me a time, give me a space. What did you see? What did you observe? Give me that feedback for me to be able to really articulate that you've seen what's gone on. That's my thank you. I'll go away.
And I think that's a good thing to land on for that is it's got to be personal to the the individual. The incentive will look different to everybody. And even if we're sitting there as leaders going, well, the incentive you've got in some shape or form is we're going to save this business and we're all going to have a job to stay with. It sounds far out, but that is sometimes what we're talking about in business. You've got to try and personalise that. And if you can personalise it in any shape or form for teams or individuals, you have got far more chance of not just keeping people on track, but avoiding the resistance. Because the resistance comes from, just think about the last time you went on I'm thinking of like doing your house up or something. And I hate DIY, by the way, and I just tap out straight away. I'm rubbish. But if I've ever had to do anything like that and it feels like a slog, I have to check myself regularly on why I'm doing it. So if I say, oh, it's going to look great when I've finished them, those curtains are going to look perfect when they're up, and, once I've got rid of this sofa and I've got a bit more space there, I know it sounds stupid, but it's kind of the same in business. You've got to be able to clear the wood for the trees sometimes.
I can get on board with that.
And I think if leaders can think of it that way, that's the best way to translate it to avoid resistance.
Yeah, excellent. Absolutely. And I think it is huge for so many people to get that bit right.
Definitely.
Definitely. Okay, moving on to the fifth of the six is resources. I'm gonna ask, because I'm not sure everybody views it, but obviously we're who we are. So let me ask the question: should people be classed as a resource?
Yeah.
I mean, I do. I view it.
Capital. That's what we are.
This is it. People talk about time and tools, etc. And sometimes I think the human element is skipped. Maybe that's why it's underappreciated or undervalued, and as a result, that's part of the difficulty getting it on.
I like the fact you brought that up, because I have this conversation all the time. Like, I'm a people's person, obviously, but we are resources, whatever way you look at it. And I think the reason that's important in this instance is lack of resources could be something like we're going through a change and we're losing people, so the job's going to get harder, right? Lack of resources could be, I've asked you to do something, but I haven't given you the computers to do it. It can be, I don't know, we've had this great idea about something we're going to do in customer service, but actually, I don't know how we're going to deliver it because we've got limited space, time, whatever it might be.
Time's huge as well, right?
Absolutely. So it's all about real-time impact for me. So if you are going to make something better for a customer, that sounds phenomenal, but how does it make it tougher on the team? So is that going to add 10 minutes each to each customer's interaction a day? In which case, that's going to involve like resources, people, sometimes the skills crossover resources as well. There's a bit of a mix between those two. I think they often come quite close together. We're talking about people. So if we cut a team, that team over here takes more work. It's not just about that team that are being cut. It's about this team who are going to take more work. Support's another one. So we can go, whoop, there's a CRM system. But if we don't have anyone internally going, right, let me help you understand that. If it's just this poor person coming in to train them on CRM from the outside and no one internally is championing it, you feel lost. So that's a lack of a resource as well. Tools, systems, I know it sounds really strange, but just the simplest of things in an organisation that fall down in terms of resources. The biggest one I could think of, it's contentious, PPE during COVID. No resource, all the stuff going on and all the information and the knowledge, and people were like, okay, one, skills felt low because we didn't actually know if we were doing the right things, and secondly, I have no resources to make sure I can keep people safe. Does that make sense? Now, that's a harsh example.
No, that makes sense.
But the frustration and and all those other words that came up as a consequence of that, lack of belief, lack of trust, lack of buy-in, lack of all those things, all came from a mix of resources and skills.
100%. And even in that, we had a call center at that time and bringing people into work, but for them to come into work, they had to come with a pass, and it had been uploaded onto the internet, all of that process. But I had 2 people within my group that needed to work from the call center, so needed to be allowed in, admittance, if you like. Your name's not down, you're not coming in type scenario, but they needed help in doing that because they didn't trust themselves to do it properly, and then needed to upload it on the tech system to get it on there to then say yes. So that was crazy really, because they was coming in to do that. I was having to help them do that, but then it was already there. So they could have been infecting me every morning, if that makes sense. But that was the only way they could work. It was the only way I could come and survive in that scenario, because they needed the people, they needed the resource we had in that time frame.
And sometimes it can actually, just lastly on this one, can actually be the other way around. You can have all the resources and be overwhelmed. So if you think of those situations where you walk in and there's too many cooks.
Yeah.
Or a whole heap of new technology just landed, is going to be the best thing ever. Wow, where do I start?
Yeah, how do we begin here?
Where's the first in? So actually, it's not about no resources, it's about overwhelm. And that leads to frustration as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then the skills can tie into that.
Frustration into confusion, into that paralysis of where do I go?
So you got to break it down into chunks. You've got to make it tangible for people.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, cool. So then, last but not least, on the 6, we have the action plan. Now, this seems the most obvious and basic to what we're trying to achieve, but for some reason, not always the case.
Very rarely the case. I think this is the problem. And I think I understand why this happens sometimes, because quite often the people who are visionary, or the people who are making those decisions to that level, are not the people who get in the dirt. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean they have people who are far better at putting a plan together for them, and getting into the detail and bringing people with them. So that's why sometimes I feel like there's a disconnect. So if we've got all the information at the top and we're making really critical, strategic, brilliant decisions, by the way, we don't sit there and go, right, it's now my job to map everything out from start to finish. We have to go, right, we have to make sure we've got the right people in for conversations. And it links directly with the vision, because the vision also it's not just about I deliver the vision and we believe in the vision and everyone can buy into it. It's who have I brought into the vision? So if I've brought the right people in at the right time early with a vision, they're the people who help me build this action plan and they bring it to life. And I stand at a distance as the visionary person, and I tweak and I communicate, and then they keep so it's not, so we call it a treadmill. If this is not happening, then people feel like they're running at something and not getting anywhere. And what happens if we've got no action plan, or one that's a bit like substandard, is this: there will be a change project that we never speak of again, because it will have started and it's still running somewhere in the background, like a little missing window on your laptop, and no one's talking about it, because actually there's no firm actions to things. So to get this right, you need to make sure you're kind of showing direction constantly. So that might look like, in some projects, weekly updates. It might look daily updates, like if it's something really, major going on in your business. It means communication's high. And when I say communication high, it's pitched to different levels, different ways of communicating. There's ownership, actions, and timeframes to every single part of the actions, because if we haven't got a decent Gantt chart stroke racing model going, there will be little things going by the wayside all the time. And sometimes the little stuff on the project plan is actually the big stuff. One of the things I wrote is to stay on track, have some form of accountability agreement with the key stakeholders, because then you should be calling each other out if we feel that we are on this, journey that feels like it's going nowhere. And also, here's the other thing about an action plan: considering off-track action plans. So I talk about this all the time. You've heard me say this loads of times. You don't set off somewhere as a consultant and don't put usable maps on. You go, I set it off so I can set my expectations. And then quite often we'll get a Scott Morrison's voice message on the group saying, and Amy's off in casinos as well, guess what's happened? I've been diverted via Mozambique, and therefore I've got to go XYZ. And you roll with the punches because it's there and you understand the journey. I kind of see it like this: your vision can be set, the action plan's associated, but you've got to have thought about what the alternative routes might be, because things might hit you square on. If you don't do that, that's why your action plan seems substandard, because it's such a big variation that it feels like you're going to go back to the start and go again. Right. If you get your action plan right with your FAQs and the things that might, take you off road and, across the desert, for instance, when it comes up, it's like, okay, plan B, plan C, plan A, plan G. And then you reconnect with the vision straight away, rather than going, right, well, we need to shelve this, call it something else, because that's what, it's not supposed to be settle from A to B. You're sometimes going to bounce around. But if you communicate that and you keep it in line with your action plan, then people are gonna be like, okay, I understand. Yeah, it's not ideal, but that's the other thing, though. Sometimes there is a shortcut available, or what do they call it? New route available. It will save you 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And actually, if we're learning all the time, and we're actually having these debriefs, and someone says, I've got an idea, and someone says, oh, actually, that's a really good idea.
But then that is going back to the point of, who do we have in the room to start the process, and having the right people in the room? Because if you don't, you'll never know these things are aligned or available to you, because you've got essentially the wrong tools in your kit bag to get off on that journey. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And the only way to keep it alive is to keep the action plan alive. And if the action plan is always aligned to the vision, and here's the thing: if the vision changes, don't start again. You recommunicate the vision and you reroute the action plan.
I think in listening to this, and I mentioned it at the top end, the human element, and we are who we are within the people, performance people. But even in your explanation, the people listening will obviously have heard everything I've heard. And I think the key function there is each of these 6 elements tie into the basic psychological and emotional needs of what humans have and want to power them forward as a how do I move. So if I just look at this really briefly before we wrap it up, if you like, is vision piece for me is that purpose and direction for the individual. That's huge. It's to get us up and going. How do we get solid in that direction, and how do we move with some unison? Skills, competence, and confidence.
They've got to come together. Absolutely, yeah.
It's a real thing, and that's massive for somebody like me when you're embarking on something new. Where I think we're thought leaders, and we are thought leaders, but that means we're constantly taking on new information. We're having to debunk old information that we've learned in a previous life, in a previous role, and create room for new knowledge. And it's not easy for everyone of us to go through this journey. So it's good. Incentives, we looked at the motivation, personal gain. What's my what? What's my why? What does it mean to me? I get the wee bit, but what does it mean to me? And that's massive for both sides. That's huge. Resources, support, tools, just to know it, time. Yeah. And even my teammates, as we said, people are a key part of that. And who's on the journey with me, essentially, if you look at it like that. Action plan, clarity and predictability.
Yeah, and even in the absence of predictability, feeling safe. Yeah, because if something is going off track and it is unpredictable, it's okay. We can make a mistake and we'll figure it out tomorrow and we'll reroute. I think that's really key, isn't it?
Yeah, and then the consensus piece, that trust and shared understanding, like you talked about earlier. We had that value, being heard, having a part to play, knowing where we're going and feeling.
I might not agree with it, but I understand it, or I feel seen and heard, and it wasn't token gesture. And I guess maybe for me, I think one of the last things to think about is fundamentally, if one of these things are missing, some of the words in the last column are the things that give you the early warning.
Absolutely.
So if we look at the word disorientation, so going back to our discussions, if you're feeling that in your organisation, it's highly likely people are not connecting with your vision.
Right.
If you feel like you're on a treadmill, it's the other way around. It's like we're going through the motions but we're not getting anywhere. It's highly likely that the action plan's not in play. Because if the action plan's in play, then we feel like everyone's off on their own route. Does that make sense? If we feel like and the word that, and I use this in the beginning, we're seeing sabotage going on where people are really going against the grain, then the reality is our consensus somewhere has gone. So what have you done recently to reconnect with people, bring them on board, even if the message is tough, to get them to understand and reconnect? If you're seeing anxiety, and don't forget anxiety shows up in different ways, fear, anger, stress, burying your head even sometimes, then it's highly likely that people feel they haven't got the skills to get through the situation, whether that's hard or soft.
And that behaviour relates to people not being able to ask for help effectively.
Absolutely. If there's resistance, people cannot see the benefit in doing what they're doing when you're going to get a lack of incentive for me or we, like we said. And then the resources bit, for me, that's quite a key. You can spot that a mile off. Frustration, because you can tell that people really want to be with the vision and get to the end, but they're almost
out of control,
and then some of the behaviors that surround that actually lead to breaks down in communications and stuff. So I know it sounds weird, but I quite often cover the 6 elements up and I just show the disorientation, sabotage, anxiety, resistance, frustration, and treadmill, and say, are any of those things happening to you right now? And if you feel any of them are really strong, go back to that point on the Lippitt-Knoster because something's missing. And ultimately, success is the word you want, which is if you feel like you've covered all the bases. They're not perfect, but you're constantly working on them. And I always think of them like 6 pans you need to keep boiling. And if you don't keep it boiling, they're going to burn out. And then you will get one of these words pop up and you'll think, wow.
Don't keep adding the water.
To keep adding the water, you need to keep them. And people who work being coaching, I always talk about my bubbling pans and keeping relationships going and stuff. But it's so true, and particularly when it comes to change in project management. And actually, I think that's the easiest thing to say is like we go in and do all this stuff around the psychology of change, but some of these words, if they're showing up in abundance, you can link it back to this model very quickly. And it normally tells you where you didn't do the right amount of work in the beginning.
Okay, awesome. And hopefully the listeners out there have definitely taken something from that. And if you're in the midst of change right now, and you're witnessing the anxiety, the disconnection, etc. that you're seeing. What might be missing from your 6 elements? What water are we not adding to what pan? And how can we reconnect ourselves to that? So, as always, I say this, if there's questions about what you've heard, or you'd like further information, make notes in the comments for us. We'll come back to you and give you some more information. But I think let that sink in. I think there's a lot to take on board there, but it's a really, really good tool framework to use whilst in the midst of what is complex change.
I think it's good for individuals and an organisation, isn't it? So quite often if I'm talking to someone, like they're leading the change and I'm maybe coaching, I'll get them to rate themselves 1 to 5 on those 6 elements. Like, how strong do you think you are at communicating a vision? How strong are you at digging into skills and resources, or do you leave that to someone else? And they often have a little bit of a light bulb moment, realising that the enablers around them are the ones that pick some of those things up, so they need to support them more to do what they need to do. But I also ask organisations, exec boards, I say, rate yourself 1 to 5 on these things, and they do have a moment where they go, actually, yeah, we thought we were delivering the vision with clarity, but we're just delivering it in one language. We're not talking at all the right levels. We thought we got consensus because we had a nice roundtable about it, but we actually didn't take nothing that was given to us in that and do anything with it. We didn't understand that incentive is not just, well, you'll keep your job. There's more to it than that. I'm being facetious, but that is
no, it is, and I'm shocked because I've been in rooms where that's been said.
Me too. And sometimes it's the resources bit that pops out late that we didn't realise, and we could probably sort it, but we do have a holy crap moment where we realise, and then we think, oh, do we just forge on, or do we actually pause for a moment and then restart the treadmill? But then we start the treadmill and we get back to the action plan, and then we're there. So I think lots of things to think about for you as an individual. Where's your strength? You might be great with vision and getting people to understand, but can you change the message slightly to different groups? Can you get better at that? And if you're not in the weeds, you're not the action plan person, how can you support the person who is? And how can you stand back as a visionary and drop in and apply, your support in different areas? Because that's key.
Excellent. Well, Tracy, thank you very much. I think we've really opened that up to the masses.
Yeah.
And to close us off with a movie quote, we'll be back.
The People Performance Podcast, brought to you by T2.